What is up, guys? Varuk here, and today I finally decided to share all of my secrets as it pertains to my class, the Frost Whisperer, and so I'm going to go through literally everything. I'm just going to teach you everything. By way of introduction, my name is Varuk. I play on the server Scarabear S1, and currently my guild is called Obsidian. Again, the class that I play is the Frost Whisperer, and it's a DPS class. Basically, of course, the role in PvP and PvE is just to be a slayer. PvE, I do massive burst damage and pretty consistent AoE damage, and when it comes to PvP, this class is hands down the best killer in the entire game. I'm just going to put kind of an example up on the screen of a siege that we had one time, and as you can see, I got 96 kills in this siege, and everybody else with the big numbers were all Frost Whisperers. So if that doesn't give you any indication as to how powerful and how potent these Frost Whisperers are, if played correctly, I don't really know what else is. When it comes to burst damage and single target DPS, this is one of the most superior classes in the entire game. And so with that being said, let's go right into the skill priority. If you open up your skill menu, go to skill. Let's just take a look here briefly at all these skills and abilities. So we have Frostbolt, which is just a regular casted ability which slows your enemies. Ring of Frost, which is an AoE ability. Ice Storm, which is another AoE ability, Frozen Sphere, which is again another AoE ability, and I'll explain kind of the synergy that all of these have with each other when we get to the rotation section. Teleport, which is just kind of a movement ability that gets you across the field quickly. Ice Block, which is an immunity skill which prevents you from dying if somebody's attacking you, and you can just pop that and hide yourself in an ice block. Ice Spike, which is probably the most potent ability in the entire game. It does hands down the most damage that I've ever seen out of any skill. And so Ice Spike is going to play a tremendous role as it pertains to this particular class. Glacier Fury is the ultimate skill, which makes your Frostbolt and your Ice Storm instant cast, and it has an increased chance to grant Whisper of Frost, which is, of course, the stack that you gain that gives you the ability to consume it and cast Ice Spike. Mana Freeze is just your run-of-the-mill interrupt ability. Whenever somebody's casting something, you can interrupt them with Mana Freeze when it's available. And then finally, Whisper of Frost is going to be that stack or that thing that is what makes this Frost Whisperer so powerful. Whisper of Frost, first of all, you can stack it up to 3 times, and what it does is it increases the speed, the casting speed on your Frostbolt, which is going to be the move that you're using most of the time, and that's where the majority of your damage is going to come from. And so having 2 of these at all times is going to be essential when you're in kind of the sustained phase of your DPS rotation. In terms of the skill leveling priority, you're going to want to level up Ice Spike first. So get this skill to level 9 as soon as possible, and then if you get a Void Soul, if you're lucky enough to get a Void Soul, use that Void Soul to level your Ice Spike to level 10 first. Secondly, you're going to want to level up Frostbolt. So I say kind of Frostbolt and Ice Spike, you want to level those up concurrently, but by and large, Ice Spike is hands down the best option to go with first, because this is what is going to help you flex in pretty much every area. In PvE, you're going to do massive spike damage, massive burst damage, and then in PvP, this skill is going to help you one-shot people. Again, Frostbolt being the second one. So all of these other skills, you can level them up kind of evenly. It doesn't really matter. Ice Block and Teleport are not DPS abilities, so if you're looking to maximize the amount of damage that you do, you can really neglect these, and that's really of no consequence, as long as you level up Ice Spike first, Frostbolt second, and then you can kind of mix these in however you prefer after that. In terms of the glyphs, we'll start from the top and go to the bottom here. Frostbolt, the last glyph, Sharp, which gives you a 5% increased damage bonus. That is going to be hands down the best, and that's kind of going to be the trend as we move through these skills. Ring of Frost, I go with the 5% increased damage as well, and just taking a look, you have either an increased crit chance, an additional root for 1 second, or a 5% increased damage. I go with the 5% increased damage because I just think it's the best. Same thing with Ice Storm. You have a cleave ability, which lets you hit 2 additional targets, but I think the 5% damage is going to be better, because if you build your class correctly, you're going to be critting a lot. You won't need to go into the crit chance, and if you have 5% damage on top of the crit, if you build your character correctly, then you're just gonna be doing way more damage than you would be if you were just taking the straight up crit chance. Frozen Sphere, Agile is what you want to go with. This class heavily relies on your ability to use Frozen Sphere. I'll explain the specifics again when we get to the rotation section, but Frozen Sphere, as soon as that's up, that's when you're going to be able to do your big damage, and so I pick Agile. Reduces the cooldown on Frozen Sphere by 5 seconds. The more that this skill and ability is available, the more damage you're going to do. When it comes to Teleport, reduces the cooldown on Teleport by 5 seconds. This is the best in PvE and PvP, just because you know, the more you have that ability to be mobile and move from one location to another is going to be better. It's going to help you spend less time moving and spend more time attacking. Ice Block, again, agile is probably going to be the best. It reduces the cooldown by 10 seconds. This really isn't a huge deal, but I found that agile is probably the best and it gives you the most survivability. Ice Spike, you have an option. If you're doing single target DPS, always go sharp, the 5% increased damage. However, if you're in PvP, I always go with cleave. And what it does is it lets you hit one additional target. The reason why this is so important, and the reason why I use this every time, and this is my secret that I'm sharing with you, just being completely transparent, is that oftentimes when I fight people in PvP, they kind of have this herd mentality and they stand next to each other. And what this does is if I cast an Ice Spike, again, mind you, this is the most powerful ability in the game, and two people are standing next to each other, it hits both of them for full damage. There have been times when I've actually hit two people for over 700k and just killed both of them instantly. This is how I'm able to achieve just massive kills in large castle sieges. I'm quite frequently mostly on the top in every siege that I play, and I don't say that to boast, I just say that because this ability really is that strong. Glacier Fury, Mana Freeze, and Whisper Frost of course don't have any sort of glyphs, so we're going to move on now to the masteries. When it comes to masteries, you always want to use Chilly Cold. Again, this class's main priority is to get Ice Spike to deal as much damage as possible. And you'll see here that Ice Spike, with this current effect, Ice Spike deals 49% increased damage, and Whisper of Frost has a 12% increased chance to appear. Whisper of Frost, again, is that ability which gives you a stack to consume to even cast Ice Spike in the first place. Chilly Cold is going to increase your hardest hitting ability, making you do devastating damage. And then if you get it to tier 4, that Whisper of Frost additionally has a 15% chance to occur, which is very, very good. What I would say is get your Chilly Cold to tier 3 first, and then I would get these other abilities here, these other masteries, to tier 2. You're probably asking, okay, well, if you're only using Chilly Cold, then why are you speccing into Remorseless and Protective Field? Well, if you look closely on the left-hand side, you'll see that when you level these abilities up, you get some of your main stat. And what I mean by main stat is you get Intellect. This class uses Intellect. And so if you look here, it says Intellect plus 191, but if the mastery is unactivated, you only get 50% of the attribute. So by leveling this up to at least level 2 and leveling this one up to at least level 2, almost level 3, I get a lot of intellect even though it's only half of it. So that's well over 100 intellect, which is going to drastically increase the amount of damage that I do, even though I'm technically using Chilly Cold and I have Chilly Cold active. Moving on to the talent tree, the first thing I want to show you is the PvE talent tree. So I always use Bravery because more attack is always better. I always use Mana Torrent. This is hands down the best skill for PvE. Basically, you cast it 3 times and it increases your base damage with all of your abilities by a tremendous amount. I have mine at level 4 right now with my Artifact Reforges, and so every time I attack, I gain 4% increased damage, and it stacks up to 3 times. So I get essentially 12% increased damage at all times as long as I'm attacking once every 8 seconds. Secondly, because I'm a casting class, of course, you go 10 in casting speed. I'm not a melee class, so I don't need attack speed, so I do 10 in casting speed. The next line, undisputed best in every single situation, is going to be Force Release. This is kind of like Mana Torrent in that it gives you a base damage boost. However, I have mine at level 5, and this one activates when your mana is over 90%. With this class, I don't think I've ever gone below 90% mana, which is kind of crazy. I don't know if that's a bug or what it is, but this class is pretty much always over 90% mana, which means that 100% of the time, I have 18% increased damage. Pretty much it. Well, okay, it says every 6 seconds, but to me, it feels like 100% of the time I have 18% increased damage. So hands down, this is the best. And we're going to talk about the Artifact Reforge rolls a bit later. When it comes to Sharp Edge versus Saw Blade, I think that Saw Blade is going to give you more value because, again, crit damage with this class, if you crit with Ice Spike, you're going to hit so freaking hard, it's going to make the other person just poop their pants. And crit damage, I think, has a much higher value for this class specifically just because of Ice Spike. You're trying to get it to crit, and when it crits, you want it to hit very hard. Now, the reason why I spec'd into this at least once into Sharp Edge is because if you happen to get an Artifact Reforge roll, you cannot benefit from any additional stats in Sharp Edge unless you have at least 1 point invested. So I invested 1 point here, and then the rest of the points went into Saw Blade. Next up, we have Ruthlessness for PvE. You deal 10% increased damage to targets below 20% health. I think it's 5 at the base value, but I have an artifact roll that gives me +1 on that. This is going to be the best for PvE because, of course, the other ones just are not that good. This one here, Ambush, for PvE is not good. It just increases your critical strike chance against targets with no less than 80% health. So once the boss reaches 80%, this effect is pretty much useless. And then Iron Soul, I can't imagine why anybody would ever pick that. Ruthlessness is what you want to do. Next up, we have Spell Penetration, which gives you RP. That just means resistance penetration. If you've ever attacked someone before as a spellcaster and you see resistance pop up, that basically means that they completely just mitigated the damage that you did. And so for me, whenever I attack a battle mage, they have such high resistance that oftentimes my skill doesn't even do any damage at all. And so if you spec into this, it gives you a 3% increased chance to sort of bypass that resistance from that battle mage. If you're a melee class, you want to go AP or armor penetration under the Sundering Blade here. And that's of course because you're doing melee damage and you're trying to break through somebody's armor with a melee attack. Casters always want to pick Spell Penetration. Next up, Desperate Strike. This is a brand new line that we just got access to. I always pick Desperate Strike. It deals 5% increased damage, but also makes you take 10% more damage. Now, when it comes to PvE and boss fights, the boss's abilities are very predictable, and for whenever a raid-wide mechanic goes out that makes you take damage, I have never found a situation where I die from that mechanic because of this ability. So I would rather take 5% increased damage at all times and take the 10% increased damage from the boss because, again, I'm not really getting attacked that often. Looking at the other options, we have Well Trained, which increases your damage done by 5%, but taking damage will cancel this effect for 8 seconds. I think that I would rather take damage from Desperate Strike and still have the attack ability rather than lose 8 seconds on a 5% increased damage. So again, that's why I go Desperate Strike over Well Trained. And then the last one, War Machine, when you kill a target, increases your attack by 5% for 8 seconds. This effect stacks and may occur only once every 4 seconds. Each stack has an individual timer. I really, this class is a slaughterhouse monster in PvP, like I said, but really this is only going to be useful if you have just 100 enemies lined up and none of them are attacking you, so kind of useless. Moving on to the Strategist talent tree. The first one is going to be Cunning, which gives you hit rate. And just to kind of show you here, open your character menu, go to Advanced, and scroll down to Accuracy and click it. You'll see that your hit rate or your hit chance increases your accuracy. Accuracy is what determines if you're going to hit your target or not. So for this, as an example, level 70 targets, I have a 102% chance to hit them. That's other players. And accuracy against level 73 targets is 99.34%. I generally say to go for 103% accuracy to ensure that, of course, you're hitting all of your level 70 targets, your other players 100% of the time. And then whenever you're fighting a boss that is level 73, which some of them can do that, you have a 100% chance to hit them as well. Even though 99% is kind of minuscule, you have a 1% chance to miss. That basically means every 1 out of 100 abilities that you cast is going to miss, which is a huge DPS loss. So if you want to min-max in that area, I think that choosing that particular skill or that particular talent is worth it to reach that 103 threshold if you need to get there. Secondly, moving on to Fiery Resolve versus Unyielding Will versus Readiness. I think that honestly Unyielding Will is the best because it reduces all incoming crowd control effects, reduced by 10% at all times. And Readiness really just removes one of them and makes you immune to other effects for 1 second. And it actually has a 5-minute cooldown. I think that that's not really that useful, but in boss fights it can be helpful just to basically get you out of jail free instead of reducing it only by 10%. In PvP, I would take 10% at all times, but I'll talk about the PvP in just a moment. Next up, we have Precision. Precision is that which helps you to land your hits. So if somebody has like a dodge or an evade stat or anything that would like mitigate damage, Precision is what is going to help you fight against that and land your shots. Next up, we have Tactical Plan, Elusiveness, and Field Doctor. Now, I actually didn't know I had this here, but Field Doctor gives you 20% of your haste rating as resilience rating. Resilience is your basically in player versus player, it reduces the amount of damage that you take. I use this for PvP. I'm not sure why it's on there, to be honest with you. In PvE, Tactical Plan is what I go with because your movement abilities increase your critical strike chance by 5% for 3 seconds. That means if I teleport, if I roll with my military skill, I'm going to have increased crit chance for 3 seconds. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but if you're mindful that you have that tactical plan ability, you can teleport and increase your burst damage just that much more. Obviously, the rest of the skill trees here we don't have access to, and so we won't be discussing them. When it comes to PvP, bravery is going to be it again, and I actually think that there are two different ways you can go. You can go for mass scale PvP, where you sit in the back and you're able to cast this mana torrent, you're able to cast skills and benefit from mana torrent. Or what you can do in mass scale PvP or small scale PvP is spec into Cull the Weak, which increases your damage to targets affected by crowd control. So in castle sieges, when you're fighting against people who are constantly taking damage from other players and they're constantly affected by crowd control, if you have good artifact reforge rolls with Cull the Weak, I would definitely say use that instead. But really, if you just have one PvE spec, you can get away with using Mana Torrent in PvP. Of course, Chanting is going to be 10, Force Release is going to be as high as you can get it, and when it comes to Sharp Edge, again, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to spec once into Sharp Edge, and then the rest are going to go into Saw Blade. Now for PvP, instead of Ruthlessness, this is kind of useless in PvP because you deal 10% increased damage to targets below 20% health. When you're in PvP, and somebody's below 20% health, they're pretty much either on their way to dying or they're already dead. So it's just kind of useless for you to have increased damage in that area. What I pick for PvP is Ambush, because everybody above 80% HP has an 8% increased chance to, I guess, receive a critical hit from me. And so if I see somebody and they're at full HP, I cast my Frozen Sphere, we'll discuss this later, and I cast an Ice Spike. That Ice Spike has an 8% chance to critically strike, which is the bread and butter again of this class. So PvP, go for Ambush every time. Again, Spell Penetration is what you're going for because you're a spellcaster. For this next one, honestly, it's kind of a toss-up. Desperate Strike versus Well Trained. I really would never use War Machine. Whenever I'm in PvP, I'm constantly getting attacked, and the glory of this class is that I can teleport and get away from classes and kite them, and that's kind of the bread and butter of this class. And so I would say probably don't use Well Trained because you're going to be getting targeted at least every 8 seconds, especially in small scale PvP, and you're never going to get that 5% damage. But you're squishy anyway, you're already taking, damage either way. What is an extra 10% more damage if you can increase your damage by 5% at all times? It's kind of that high risk, high reward where you play super carefully and you just make sure you keep your distance, and then you benefit greatly from it if you're able to sit back and attack. When it comes to strategists for PvP, you want to make sure that you're getting your hit rate at least to 100%. Again, if you go to Character, Advanced, and Accuracy, make sure that your accuracy is 100%, and whatever else you have, you can go back into your talent tree and spec it into Grace. And that's because movement speed is of course helpful for kiting people. When it comes to PvP, Unyielding Will hands down is going to be the best ability because you want to reduce all crowd control effects by 10% at all times. That's very, very helpful. And Readiness really is not good because the second somebody uses a skill on you, you break out of it, okay, but then you can't really benefit from that for another 5 minutes, and 5 minutes is a long time. So definitely go Unyielding Will. Next up, Precision. That's a no-brainer, 13 in that. And then for the next one, I say Field Doctor all the way. You don't want to have Tactical Plan as a Frost Whisper because really that 5% critical strike is not a huge deal. Even though you are teleporting a lot, you really benefit from Field Doctor because this class is based around having a high amount of haste, and this ability gives you 20% of your haste rating as resilience rating. Again, resilience is that which protects you from other players, and so this is very, very valuable, especially if you have artifact reforge rolls, to just stack this up to level 5. I believe it goes all the way up to an 80% of your haste rating goes straight to your resilience rating. This is how you survive against rogues from one-shotting you. This is what you need to do. Moving on to the sigils, honestly, it just depends on what you have. This class, again, is going to be based around haste and crit. And kind of before we look at that, I just want to show you Character Advanced. The goal of this class is to reach 38 to 40 haste and be over 50 crit. Once you kind of get to that threshold, you're sort of safe, so to speak. My stats have been scaled down greatly, and normally I'm reaching like 62% crit and 40% haste, but honestly, I'm not geared up enough right now to be able to showcase that. I was before the patch, but not now. So going back to skills and going to sigil, for the red slotted sigils, I always go for that which gives you your main stat, or intellect in my case, and I think that's the same for every class. When it comes to the blue sigils and the yellow sigils, these are always and in every situation going to be haste or crit. Keep in mind that the ones on the bottom give you higher stat values as compared to their counterpart in the yellow slot. For example, this blue sigil here at level 4 gives you 1.6% crit rate, and this crit rate in the yellow slot at level 4 gives you not 1.6 but only 0.95%. And so again, the idea is to kind of fiddle these around and fudge them around until you have 38 to 40 haste and then over 50 crit. When it comes to the purples, I like to benefit from at least one of these that gives you a huge crit rate boost. So I have this one here that gives me vitality, which I don't really need, but I do need the crit rate, so 2.5% increased crit rate. Some people would say that for all of these you should go main stat, and by that I mean intellect, and I use at least 2 of them. I'm debating going to 3, but honestly I think that this is a really good spread here. And so I have 2 level 5 sigils, which are very good. They both give me 99 intellect, and that almost 200 intellect is a tremendous boost to my abilities damage. When it comes to gear for the Frost Whisperer, really the only mandatory thing is going to be the weapon. And what you want to do is you want to get this little sword here, the little green sword. It changes names every time you upgrade the phase, but just keep a lookout for this icon and get this sword whenever you can. What you want to do is get it to phase 3 as quickly as possible because of the equip effect. It says your attacks have a chance to grant you a stack of blessing, increasing your haste level by 70 for 20 seconds, and it stacks up to 5 times. And if you go back here to the character, click advanced and just look at my haste, right now I have 38% haste. When I have 5 stacks of that blessing, my haste goes up to 46%. So just by having this weapon just gives you a tremendous boost, and it makes your character just extremely powerful. The wonderful thing about this game is you really have many options in the way of gear that you can get. Honestly, again, this class really just requires you to kind of play a balancing game with haste and crit, and so you can pick any variation of items that you might run across throughout your journey. But for example, I have this Raincaller's Judgment Sphere. This one gives me more haste than crit. This is the haste legacy item, and there is an alternative that gives you more crit than haste. And let's go to the ring here. This is a crit ring, and next up here we'll look at the earring. This is a crit earring, and then for my necklace I have a crit necklace, and then for my helmet I have a haste helmet. Really, again, you can kind of play with this however you want. Once you get all of the tier pieces, you can get a better understanding of what you're going to want to go for, but I know that with the equipment that I have now, once I get my tier 2 set, it's really going to round out my stats a lot and give me a lot of crit and a lot of haste. So again, just a balancing game with haste and crit. Shoot for 38% of haste and at least over 50% in crit when possible. Taking a look at the tier set, the tier 1 set was actually really good for Frost Whisperer. I have dismantled mine just because I kind of felt that it was obsolete with the level, but honestly this is a really good set and I kind of wish I didn't dismantle it. I am, however, looking forward to the tier 2 set, which should be coming out next week as of the releasing of this video. If you have your 2 set, every time you cast Frostbolt, it reduces the cooldown of your Ring of Frost by 1 second, which is very good, and that kind of plays into the 5 set. Ring of Frost deals 60% more damage and reduces the cooldown of your Frozen Sphere by 4 seconds. Frozen Sphere, again, is the thing that makes your class good at what it does because it makes you do more damage, and so when you have your 5 set of this tier 1 set, it's just a very good option. But again, if you don't have that set, kind of just hold on and wait for the tier 2 set. When it comes to the tier 2 set, let's look here. When you get a 2 set, it says Ring of Frost deals 40% increased damage if the target is permanently immune to crowd control effects, which is basically every boss. It increases the damage of Ring of Frost to that target by 8% for 8 seconds. I'm not sure if that's a translational issue. I think that might be a translational issue. That kind of doesn't make sense because Ring of Frost, really you can only cast it once and then it's on cooldown. And I think the same thing is for the 5-piece set here. It says Frostbolt deals 10% increased damage. That's freaking huge. That's the main skill you're casting. And then casting Frozen Sphere has a 40% chance of reducing the cooldown of Frozen Sphere by 1 second. Also, I think that is a typo. I think it's supposed to say casting Frostbolt has a 40% chance of reducing the cooldown of Frozen Sphere by 1 second. I think that's what it's supposed to say. It wouldn't make sense if casting Frozen Sphere had a chance to reduce the cooldown by 1 second of that same ability. It just doesn't make any sense. So definitely, if you have the means to do so, get at least 1 piece from the tier 1 set because that is what is required to build your tier 2 set. And that's going to be the highest DPS for this class when you're able to get that gear. When it comes to artifacts, you kind of have to have your head on straight when you approach this. The first and most important thing out of anything is that you get Force Release and Mana Torrent as high as humanly possible. And by that I mean you get 2 of these with +2 and Mana Torrent and Force Release. So I'm just going to show you mine and just kind of explain what's going on here. Bravery is very good because it increases your attack, and then I have Force Release at +2. This is actually a perfect roll, I think. The only thing better would be Bravery +5. But other than that, this is a fantastic roll. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for the intellect on that Blessings of Flona's to be really high. So this is near the top of what you can get for intellect. It has a perfect stat on the second tree, and then on the bottom tree, Force Release +2. Really just doesn't get better than that. For Blessing of Eudora, the intellect is max, which is very good. Precision is an okay stat. I guess it's a pretty good stat, but mainly I kept this because of Force Release +2 again, and this is what put my Force Release at +5 on my talent tree. Again, look at the intellect, nearly maxed, and then Force Release is the second thing you're looking for. Moving on to Blessings of Dello, the intellect is nearly maxed, and then I have a +2 in Mana Torrent. The reason why I took this is because of the intellect and Mana Torrent, even though Holy Grace is not even a skill that I use. This is basically just a useless stat. Maybe I'll reforge this later, but really, again, you just want to focus on getting Mana Torrent. Next up, we have Blessings of Kia. Look at the intellect, it is nearly maxed out, and then I only have Mana Torrent +1 and Precision +1. This is something that I'm constantly re-rolling and reforging to try to get a better roll, but this is really honestly not that bad. +1 Mana Torrent with an 83 intellect is very good, but again, I'm going to re-roll that soon. And then when it comes to the Blessings of Artienos, I probably said that wrong. This is my first roll and probably only roll for a long time. This is a very, very difficult artifact to reforge, and I'm going to stick with what I have because the intellect is nearly maxed. Sharp Edge is a great thing for my class, even though it's only +1, and Ruthlessness is good for PvE, and so I'm just keeping it. When it comes to the pet, I actually use Miss Yaya. She gives you 25 intellect, 200 resistance penetration, which is very good for this class, and 1% crit rate, among other things. But really the bread and butter of what makes us good is the ability Critical Strike Boost. If you look here, it's a 3-minute cooldown. It says critical strike chance increased by 5%, and critical damage is increased by 20%, and it lasts for 10 seconds. The reason why this is good, again, is because the bread and butter of this class is casting Ice Spike and doing massive damage. So if you get this pet ability off and then use an Ice Spike, it's going to just do a crazy amount of damage. I have seen other people use other pets. Let's go ahead and look here. Frost, this guy has goals. But if we go to the pet, he has Magic Mia, which has Suppress. It stuns the target for 5 seconds. Completely useless in PvE. But if you look at the pet stats, it gives you crazy stats. You get 25 intellect, but you also get 2.5% haste and 5% crit damage. This is just a savage of a pet, and I actually wish I had it for both PvE and PvP. Pay close attention because in this next section I'm going to explain the rotation, which is probably what everybody's here for. When it comes to the PvE rotation, it's simple in theory, but really takes some time to master and practice, and that is because there are essentially 3 phases that you need to learn. The ramp up phase, the burst phase, and then the sustain phase. Before we jump into that, let's take a look at the skills. So the first skill here on the bottom is going to be Frostbolt, and it is just a casted ability that deals damage and slows the target. This is going to be the ability that you're casting the majority of the time, and so this is pretty much where the most of your damage is going to be coming from. The second attack, moving up from the bottom, is Ring of Frost. Ring of Frost is an instant cast ability that deals AoE damage and freezes targets in place. One important thing to note about this ability is that because it is an instant cast ability, you can get a big DPS increase by weaving it into your rotation seamlessly, which again, I'll talk about when it comes to optimizing your DPS, but for the sake of example, here's what you can do. You can cast a Frostbolt and then immediately follow it by a Ring of Frost. The next skill above that is Ice Storm. This is a casted AoE ability that damages multiple targets over time and slows them. I never use this ability, ever. I'm just kidding, I use this sometimes, but only when there are 3 or more targets stacked up together. If there are less than 3 targets stacked together, you're basically losing a lot of damage by not just casting Frostbolt instead. Again, I repeat, using Ice Storm on a single target or less than 3 targets is a significant DPS loss, so don't do it. even if your ultimate is active. Just don't do it. This skill, however, is good in PvP, particularly in mass PvP. It's really good for trapping classes that have, let's say, an immunity skill. You can trap them by casting Ice Storm near the predicted end of their immune skill, and if you time this correctly, you can damage them and slow them immediately out of their immune skill, which gives you a pretty solid advantage. Next is Frozen Sphere. Do not sleep on this ability because it is vital to your rotation. Frozen Sphere is an instant cast ability that drops an orb in the fixed location where your target was first standing when you casted it originally. The orb will stay in place and damage the target 11 times over 9 seconds. During this time, and please pay attention, the target who is standing in this Frozen Sphere takes an additional 18% increased damage from all of your attacks. This ability also is guaranteed to proc Whisper of Frost at least one time, and again, Whisper of Frost is the ability that stacks up to 3 times, increases your casting speed, and can be consumed to cast the best attack in the entire game, Ice Spike. Speaking of Ice Spike, let's go ahead and proc it here. While Whisper of Frost is active, you will see this skill here appear. Ice Spike is an instant cast ability that deals massive, freaking crazy damage that can only be cast by consuming a stack of Whisper of Frost. Lastly, we have Teleport, which is simply a mobility move. I love this move because I always use it to move out of mechanics when I'm in a boss fight or to get closer to targets and reduce the amount of time that I spend moving, which increases the amount of time that I spend attacking. Now that you know all of the abilities, let's start with the basic rotation, beginning with the sustain phase, and then I'll build on this foundation to help you kind of learn how to optimize your damage, as well as give you an understanding of the best way to transition from phase to phase. The basic rotation or sustain phase is this. You're simply just going to spam Frostbolt as much as possible to build stacks of Whisper of Frost, and then cast 1 Ice Spike whenever you have 3 stacks of Whisper of Frost. Whisper of Frost can only stack up to 3 times, and each stack makes you cast Frostbolt much faster, so the idea is to keep 2 stacks really at all times to have your Frostbolt benefit from the attack speed bonus. And then again, cast 1 Ice Spike to deal huge damage whenever you have 3 stacks. After you have that down, you want to work in the Ring of Frost or the second ability up on the skill bar. You want to try to use it as soon as it comes up, but the best way to use it is either at the end of a Frostbolt cast, but even better at the end of a Frostbolt cast immediately followed by an Ice Spike if you have 3 stacks. Ice Spike is not on the global cooldown, so you can just cast Ring of Frost and immediately follow it up with an Ice Spike, which is the best way to use it. So a recap for the sustain phase: spam Frostbolt and hover at 2 stacks of Whisper of Frost for the entire phase while you wait for the burst phase. Now let's talk about the burst phase. The burst phase begins as soon as your Frozen Sphere becomes active. Remember that when you cast Frozen Sphere, it gives you 1 stack of Whisper of Frost guaranteed, and it stays in place, damaging the target 11 times for 9 seconds. During that time, you deal 18% increased damage to any target standing in it, so the timing for this is crucial. Use this when you know that your target is going to be basically standing still for 9 seconds. So this is what you want to do. When you see that Frozen Sphere is about to be up or already is up, make sure that you have at least 2 stacks of Whisper of Frost already on deck, which you should have from your sustain phase. Then make sure your Mana Torrent and Force Release are procced, and if you want to be super pro, check and see if any other classes in your party are giving you damage buffs at that time, or anything else that would increase your damage, such as a Bard Song. And when all of the stars have aligned, figuratively speaking, prop your Frozen Sphere, then cast Frostbolt, Ice Spike, Frostbolt, Ice Spike, and Frostbolt, Ice Spike. You can also throw in a Ring of Frost there at the end. If you do this rotation correctly, you will cast the last Ice Spike just before your Frozen Sphere damage buff disappears from the target. Don't be afraid to use all of your stacks to cast Ice Spike, because if there really is any time to use it, it would be now while your damage is hyper buffed. After the Frozen Sphere disappears, you just want to return back to the sustain phase where you spam Frostbolt and hover at 2 stacks of Whisper of Frost again. Now that you understand the basics of the sustain phase and the burst phase, let me briefly discuss what I call the ramp up phase. Again, the overall objective of this class is to cast Frostbolt really fast, so you need to quote-unquote ramp up as early on into the fight as possible. What do I mean by that? Well, remember the legendary weapon effect? Every time you attack, you have a chance to increase your haste by 70, which stacks up to 5 times. And at 5 stacks, it increases my haste again by at least 7%, and it's refreshable. So you can have your haste increase by at least 7% for the entire fight as long as you're attacking. The idea is to attack as fast as possible, as early as possible, so that you're spending the majority of the fight benefiting from the maximum of 5 haste stacks from your legendary weapon's effect. You do this by opening with your ultimate ability, which makes your Frostbolt again instant cast. So the point again here is to use everything that I can to burst and attack as fast as I can right at the opening, and here's what you do. Start by casting Frostbolt at least 3 times and get 3 stacks of Mana Torrent. As soon as you hit 1 stack of Whisper of Frost, you're going to want to pop your ultimate, pop your pet skill, cast Frozen Sphere, and then just spam Ice Spike and Frostbolt as fast as possible. The reason why I cast 3 Frostbolts at the beginning of this ramp up phase is because when your Frostbolts are instant cast from your ultimate skill, you do not get Mana Torrent, because Mana Torrent only activates when you successfully cast a channeled ability, and an instant cast does not count as a channeled ability. And right when I have 8 seconds left, I want to stop casting Ice Spike and just go right back into my sustain phase. The reason why I wait until there are 8 seconds left to stop casting Ice Spike is because the idea here again is to end the ultimate ability phase with 2 stacks of Whisper of Frost so that you can transition into your first sustain phase with 2 stacks of Whisper of Frost right away. Here is what it looks like all strung together. Begin by ramping up, cast Frostbolt 3 times for 3 stacks of Mana Torrent, then wait for 1 stack of Whisper of Frost, and as soon as you see it, cast your ultimate, use your pet skill, cast Frozen Sphere, and then spam Frostbolt and Ice Spike again as fast as you can. When you have 8 seconds remaining on your ultimate, stop casting Ice Spike and just spam Frostbolt to try and end your ultimate with at least 2 stacks of Ice Spike. Then it is sustain time. Frostbolt and hover at 2 stacks of Whisper of Frost, weaving in your Ring of Frost at the end of a Frostbolt, and again preferably followed up by an Ice Spike if you need to dump a stack. We wait for Frozen Sphere to be up, keep an eye out on your buffs, and wait for the stars to align. Again, cast Frozen Sphere, and then it's Frostbolt, Ice Spike, Frostbolt, Ice Spike, Frostbolt, Ice Spike, and then back to the sustain phase. Then the rest is just rinse and repeat, and that's really it. Just make sure that you use your pet ability during burst phases or during phases where you foresee that you'll be using your ultimate ability. That's going to be the best use of your pet ability here. And for the rotation in terms of AoE targets, the rotation is exactly the same for AoE targets, but instead just do the same thing and then cast Ice Storm whenever it's up. I know that was a lot, but I hope you understood it. The PvP rotation is a bit simpler. Just use Ice Spike and you win. That's it. No, honestly, I mean it. You just use Ice Spike and you win. Like seriously, you enter a match, you pop Frozen Sphere on the first person that you see, you get a stack of Whisper of Frost, and you just get that increased damage on the target, and you just cast Ice Spike and you win. That's it. You just crush everybody. No, but if you want to get fancy with it, here's what I do. Okay, I start every match with a teleport just before the gates open so that I begin with a shield, and then I pick a target, cast Frozen Sphere, pop my pet skill, and then just spam Ice Spike and wreak havoc on my target. Super easy. Other than that, you can just trap people with Ice Storm if they use an immune skill like I discussed earlier, and basically you win. Just focus, fire, and spam Ice Spike. That's all you got to do. It's really not that difficult. So that is going to be it for my comprehensive Frost Whisper guide. I told you guys literally everything. I laid it all out on the ground, and so I hope that you appreciate my transparency with you. I know some people are kind of hesitant to want to share the secrets, but I wanted to just equip you to play one of the funnest classes in this game, and honestly, it's all about having fun and playing with your friends anyway and competing, and so I want everybody to be on the same level when it comes to damage comparisons and everything, because that's really what makes the game go, is having competition and having fun. And so if you guys did enjoy the video, please like it and share it with your friends. I'm going to be making more of these class guides in the very, very near future. It just took me some time to make sure that I really understood my class before I gave that to you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have other people that are the top players for their given class come on sort of as like an interview style, and I'm going to interview them and give you all the answers that you got in this guide, but for the class that you're looking for. So if you're excited about that and you want to hear about your class, please go in the comment section down below and recommend to me, what class do you want to see? What class are you guys interested in? Which one should I do first? And honestly, I'm really excited to do that. I really do love this game. And so again, thank you so much for your viewership, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video very soon. Until next time, enjoy your day.